Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Public Works Committee will come to order, and as usual, we will first consider the consent agenda. Are there any items that need to be removed for discussion from consent?
G5.
G5, okay.
C5, excuse me.
I'm sorry, C5. Anything else?
Let me just look through. I have none.
All right, is there a motion on the balance?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right, if there's no discussion, those in favor of approving the balance, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no? That's unanimous. Let us then go to item C5, please.
Item C5, information on Hickory Creek subdivision roads.
And we have city attorney staff here to report on this item. Mr. Taylor, did you have specific questions or just want an overview?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Turner, I don't know who's giving the presentation. I just like a general overview. Some of the residents from the Hickory Creek community came in to the last meeting, as you're aware, had some questions. Staff went back and got answers to those questions. Some of them have had the opportunity to review the information on the website, but just for the record, I'd like for you to state some of the answers to these questions, please.
Certainly. There was a question about was the city framing the consideration of the city participation in local improvements of private streets? How were we framing that, that question? And the answer was that unless both the streets were dedicated unless both an offer of dedication for the streets was made and the city accepted those streets, then the fact that they were shown as public streets on records or that the offer was made doesn't mean anything. The key is that they had to both be accepted and offered for the city in order for them to be public streets. So there was some question, in essence, about what was the requirement for a street to truly be a public street, and the answer is it had to both be dedicated and accepted by the city.
And Mr. Turner, I'm sorry, my understanding from the memo is the city or the state had to accept
Or
it.
the state, that is correct, I'm sorry, yes. And in fact, that is pertinent because in this case, the roads were dedicated to the state for acceptance, and in fact, there's information indicating that they were built to state standards at one time, but that there was never any indication that the state accepted them for maintenance.
A relevant request for information, if I'm still appropriate, Mr. Chairman. I've heard from some of the neighbors, and they haven't viewed any documentation stating that the streets are actually private. So if we have a map or some other city documentation stating that, could we maybe go back and get that map so I could meet with the neighbors and go over that information at that time?
We'll see what we can find for you. Yes,
Thank
sir.
Any other questions? Yes.
This plat may go back decades, I don't know. But there are, and by the way, I misspoke it 2 meetings ago, there are 1,000 miles of roughly city roads in the city limits, of which about 10% are private. It's 100 miles. I said 1,000. The wrong number. Is there any way of checking the plats?
The plat was actually recorded on March 28, 1995.
But I'm talking about just now. If we know what 100 miles of roads we think are private, should we go check the plats? I have a few in my ward. Actually, I have quite a few.
So you're talking about checking miles and miles of roads, and not just a particular.
Yeah, and I may not want to request that because y'all may shoot me. But I can think of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or so alone in the West Ward. I mean, I'm just, for some reason in 1995, somebody wrote public on that plat and nobody checked it.
Well, that may be the case, but again, that's just an offer of dedication. It wasn't accepted by the state or the city.
Okay.
So just because it's there doesn't mean it's actually a public road.
Well, let me ask a question a different way. Excuse me. Different way. Do we have a list of what we consider to be private roads?
Yes.
Yeah. So we could make that available if someone wanted to check.
Right.
Yeah.
It might be easier.
Okay. Is that on the website?
No, but we could put it on the website.
I think it'd be nice to put on their private roads or something, because I can see where they're coming from if I looked at a recorded piece of paper at City Hall or wherever it is, county building. Register of Deeds, that's courtroom, and it said something, I would expect that to be correct.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So the information that Mr. Taylor has requested will go to Mr. Taylor, and Mr. Taylor then will meet with the neighborhood. And we have a separate item for discussion. This is an information item.
One of the gentlemen who submitted the questions, so I was just wondering if maybe I could take a point.
Actually, we're not really in debate at this point. This was a response to questions. If the question has not been answered, if you would get with Mr. Taylor so the information that's provided to him can be discussed with you, that would be ideal. All right, thank you. Anything else then on this side?
Let me ask. Oops.
Yes.
A question. Does title insurance come into play here? If a person buys a piece of property with the understanding that it's a public road and it's not, is that not a defect in title?
Good question,
I don't know, I have to look at that.
Because that would be a potential remedy for the residents. Not very good for the title company, but
I wouldn't think so, because again, you've got to have both the offer dedication and acceptance, so the title company, I would assume, would just say, you have to make sure that both of those things occur, so we're not going to insure over an absence of those occurring.
okay.
But I mean, I can check.
Okay. If you would, I'd appreciate it.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Taylor?
Instead of just reviewing the answers to all three questions, which I think we all can read, I'm speaking to the neighborhood now. If you have any additional questions, if you would just submit those to me, and, this thing isn't a sprint, it's a marathon, and I think we'll get to the bottom of it. I feel that the council is hearing what we have to say, and we want to make sure that your voice is being heard. So I'll make sure I provide you with these three questions. If you don't have it, and any other additional questions, we'll get them back on the floor, and we'll get some answers to them.
I would just like to say that, in reference to the last statement, that all of us were issued a disclosure statement when we close on our properties, that these roads were public roads.
Yeah, and that has been taken into account, but go ahead and in the conversation with Mr. Taylor, if you will bring that up, and we'll see if that has been answered. Thank you. Okay, this was an information item. We'll go now to the general agenda, and item G1 also relates to the issue of the neighborhood. So let's go to G1, please.
Item G1, ordinance amending Chapter 74 of the City Code relating to streets and sidewalks.
Okay, and now just to frame this for you, there was a charge that was taken by staff using which they drafted some proposed changes. It has come to our attention that the changes were not necessarily what was being sought. What we have before us today are the draft materials that were provided and which were available for review. However, Mr. Turner is recommending that rather than consider these for action today, that the committee discuss what other alternatives may have been desired, and that be taken back for redrafting. With that, I understand, Mr. Taylor, that you have had an opportunity to review that and have some points that you would like to raise.
I'll try to raise these points as briefly as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Turner, there are 3 points that I'll try to get across. The first one deals with the total project cost. Of course, as presented, staff is making a recommendation that the residents have to pay the entire cost of the project, not just the cost of the materials. It'd be my recommendation that we go back to the drawing board and just considering, as we've done in the past, that the residents just have to pay for the cost of materials and be able to pay that cost over a period of time. I think the whole concept was to make it easier for the residents who tend to be on the high end of the sliding scale to be able to make some of the payments. And I think the way the ordinance is currently presented actually makes things a little bit more difficult. So whether the committee considers it or not, that is one provision that I'd like us to go back and take a look at. Secondly, under the current proposal, it looks like the residents I want to make sure they can utilize a sliding scale, even if they don't have water and sewer. And I've heard some rhetoric on one side and on the other. I just want to make sure residents do have that option of utilizing the sliding scale, and that's pretty simplistic. Lastly, there was a question about BST. Currently, I believe that if roads don't have both water and sewer, then BST could be approved. I'd ask that BST be covered under the sliding scale, and I don't think that's currently covered under this particular proposal. If it's not, I just ask that BST be included for those neighborhoods who want to be eligible for the sliding scale, if that makes sense.
That seems pretty straightforward. Any questions about that? Yes, Mr. Clark.
Right there. First off, I think it would have been better to have had a presentation on this first, because a lot of folks don't know what we're talking about. But the sliding scale is where, depending on the value of the homes, you can either, the residents are either asked to pay 100% or zero.
Or something in between.
Or something in between, a lot in between. And that is based on what percent the value of that home is of the average house in the city. And I think the average house is 140 something.
150.
120, 130. So just in case, if yours was exactly 1% or evil, was 130, which would be 100% of the average, you would pay, the city would pay 70 and the neighborhood would pay 30.
Right.
Just as an example. If you had a more expensive house, you could get all the way up to 100% or down to zero. So that's what we mean by sliding scale, just for the folks listening. Tied to that, did the sliding scale, I always thought it applied to all roads. Does it not apply to the, and by the way, let me comment on that too. There are, in essence, two types of roads. One is what I would call the more traditional asphalt, which is what people are used to seeing. And the other one is a BST, which is a cheaper version. I always thought we put down whatever they had. So if a street was BST, we kept the BST when we brought it into the city. But I thought all of them, because I had a BST road in the West Ward that the sliding scale applied to. I think.
As revised, it would only apply to the traditional roads.
Okay.
And that is the request, is that we make sure it can apply to BST roads.
Which it currently does. The sliding scale currently applies.
As revised here, no, but
But I'm talking about
possibly
current.
as
Right.
currently, yes.
No, my attorney here is saying no.
Please, go ahead. This is Ms. Marilena J. Guthwald,
Yes.
Assistant City.
Yes. So currently, you have a sliding scale. You have two categories. You have residents who are assessed, either pursuant to petition or when the council orders down the project. They do not have the option of having a sliding scale. Then you have residents who enter into a contract with the city for the work or who pay for the work before the project commences. That latter category is further subdivided into two more categories. They're the ones who have both utilities installed and they have their roads paved with hot mix asphalt, which is the asphalt you were talking about, council member. The other category are residents who may not have both water and sewer installed, and therefore their roads are paved with bituminous surface treatment. Now, the ones who are afforded the sliding scale currently are the ones who would enter into a contract with the city or pay for the work up front, and whose roads can be paved with hot mix asphalt because they have both water and sewer service installed. The ones who have maybe not both utilities installed and who get paved with bituminous surface treatment do not currently have a sliding scale available to them. Also, the first category, where residents are being assessed, do not have the sliding scale available to them. So our intent was to broaden the reach of the sliding scale, make it available also to people who are assessed, as well as people who are entering into a contract with the city or who pay for the work before the project commences. Now, the people who are assessed, one final point, are those who have both utilities installed and can have their streets paved with hot mix asphalt. There is not currently a provision in the ordinance which allows an assessment for people who do not have both utilities installed and who would get paid with bituminous surface treatment. I know that was a lot. So.
I am almost positive, although I probably need to drive out and look at it, that I had a situation where a neighborhood petitioned, they raised their 30%, and we put down BST. And what you just told me is that's impossible.
Well, the ordinance literally reads in the manner that I've described. But
I'll tell you the road out. Okay. All right.
In broad brush, what we have now is we have a sliding scale already available.
Right.
What we don't have are provisions for payment over time.
Right.
The intent coming into this meeting was to have prepared an alternative through which we could approve adding payment over time as an option.
Correct.
That was done. However, there were several artifacts of the way it was done that don't meet the expressed needs of the neighborhood in
Right.
this case, and could work to the disadvantage of other neighborhoods. That's why I started out by saying, let's hear those so that we can get that in
Well, I do have
discussion and come back. Yes.
Two other comments. Mr. Taylor brought the issue of total cost, and there's labor and materials. This is the way we've broken it out.
Correct.
Traditionally, what's the percent of labor and what's the percent of materials?
70% materials, 30% materials, 70% labor, and equipment rental. So the city's cost is traditionally 730.
That's where the 70-30 came from.
That's what I thought. I thought materials were roughly 30 and 70%. So if we only charge materials, we're automatically reducing everyone's fee, even if they paid 100% by 70%.
Correct.
And the last one, since I thought we were going to talk about payment over time, which I think is a good idea, I thought 10-year financing was a little long. I think 3 to 5 would work because these typically aren't that large. And also tied to that, if someone didn't pay, do we have options to put property liens? Or what is our option to collect? If we pave the road and then they don't pay, what are our options? I'd like that covered later.
We'll do that. There are some restrictions under the statute that gives us authority to place liens, and so that's somewhat what's affecting.
And if the liens are, where do we stand in particular in relationship to the mortgage?
We'll bring that back.
Thank
We
you.
could take the road away.
It's like getting the burial costs before you put them in the ground. If you don't get it up front, you're in trouble. But anyway, go ahead, that's all.
All right, Mr. Taylor, other? Okay, now, recognizing that what we don't have today is a proposal for final action because it's going back to be reworked before presentation. But so with that caveat, we had 2 folks sign up for comments. Let me just ask Ms. Lindy Johnson if you'd care to step up and add to the conversation, so we're recognizing that we're not talking about final action today.
Sure. Can I pass these over?
Sure.
So I've spent a lot of time along with my neighbors kind of looking into this, and I appreciate some of the legwork that you guys have done as well, because I think it's going to benefit everybody in the long run. Just to give everybody kind of a historical overview, 95, you guys recognize that the dedication for public use was filed with the state and accepted. Then there was the plat that was recorded with the Register of Deeds office. Then there was a letter issued to Mr. Grubbs with the City County Planning Board stating that the roads in the Hickory Creek subdivision, which according to the Register of Deeds information, Book 38, Plat number 18, Hickory Creek Road, Hickory Creek Court, and Stacy Court are all part of the Hickory Creek subdivision. So the state said all 3 roads were installed to state standard and would be eligible for state maintenance when the petition was submitted. There was a petition submitted. I talked to the Winston-Salem Division of Highways, and they said the petition was filed in June of 1998. In July of 1998, the petition was denied. Unfortunately, the state does not have that record. They simply have it in their database that the petition was filed, the petition was denied, and the only note there says that it needs work. So I have inquired with the Division of Highways both in Winston-Salem as well as DOT down in Raleigh and with Joyce Krawick's office to find out exactly what could have occurred in a 3-year period when all utilities would have been underground, all easements would have been taken care of, there's no overhead, there's no new paving or anything that was done over a 3-year period. And they are researching to find out where that stopgap was. After that, we were forced annexed in 2007. We started paying city taxes. Our roads since 2007 have, and the city has said on a couple occasions that things were done in error, but there were things that were done to our roads to make the residents think, at least, that we were covered by city maintenance. It was inferred based on the work that we saw performed in the neighborhood. There's no private road disclosure form in any of our closing packets. None of us were ever told that the roads were going to be private, which is required during closing by state law. If a road is privately maintained, they have to know at the time of closing. The precedent that the city has set for maintaining our roads includes the addition of street signs. They were put in. They have 311 on the back of them. They say City of Winston-Salem, the stop signs as well as the street signs. Snow and ice removal is done every single time we have a winter weather event. We've got potholes that have been filled on multiple occasions, at least twice in 2015. Then we have lighting, 280 plus linear feet of lighting that was installed on Stacy Court And the portion of Stacy Court specifically between Forest Trails Drive and Hickory Creek Road, which is, based on the Register of Deeds recording and the plat, part of the Hickory Creek subdivision. What I don't think anybody in this room recognized is that the city of Winston-Salem, at least since 2010, and that's as far back as the records would go, Stephanie Benson with the Powell Bill Fund, she's the manager down in Raleigh, the city has filed for state funds for pavement on Stacy Court between Forest Trails and Hickory Creek Road since 2010. What I gave you in your packet is not only the Register of Deeds slip, as well as the plat itself, but the 5 pages that follow. It's page 165 of the 2010 filing for the Powell Bill. It says Stacy Court from Hickory Creek Road to Forest Trails Drive for a total of 770 feet, and for Stacy Court from Forest Trails Drive into the cul-de-sac. Stacy Court, that 777 feet that the city filed funds for that year, is part of the Hickory Creek subdivision. Simply by listing it on that sheet, the city has taken ownership for maintenance of that road. Look at 2011, page 165. It's listed there as well. 2012, page 166. 2013, 166. 163 in 2014, and then you move on to 2015. So at least since 2010, which is the records that Stephanie Benson had readily available, the city has filed and received funding, which in 2015 there was over $6 million worth of funding that the city received from the Powell Bill Fund. This is my question to you. How does the city of Winston-Salem stand by and look at Hickory Creek subdivision when we've been told, oh, this was done in error? Oh, we shouldn't have extended the city maintenance there. It was outside of the limits. You've put the lighting in, and you filed with the state for multiple years. This is not something that happened once. I get we accidentally sent an asphalt truck down there and paved your pothole one day. I don't understand how this has been submitted to the state 5 years in a row.
All right, thank you. We'll have our attorney's office look into those issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Tom and Nessa Spark. And if you have information, no? Okay, thank you. And I know the gentleman who was popping up. Do you have comments?
No, that was sufficient.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Garrity.
I just talked to Mr. Turner and to the city attorney. Another possibility that council might want to consider would be to change your policy on accepting streets in this probably very few cases like this where you actually have this kind of letter where the NCDOT said the streets were constructed to state standards, which we have, and then for whatever reason the final application wasn't processed. You could consider changing your policy to accept those streets. It'd be I don't think there'll be that many of those, and it wouldn't set the precedent of taking in the whole 100 miles. It's something we could look at and come back to you next month.
I'd definitely be in favor. I don't know if you expected me to say anything else.
I'm sorry, can I have one thing?
Yes, please. Mm-hmm.
Also, the list of streets that was given after the meeting in November of the different places who had submitted for sliding scale that weren't done, if you go back and look, there's a lot of those streets that are also listed on the Powell Bill Fund. I did not go through them and look for a block to block, but a lot of the names of those streets are on here. And since the filing changed from 2014 to 2015, in 2014, you had to specify block to block. In 2015, it's simply the name of the road and the listing of the footage. So that may be something you want to check into as well. There may be other streets in the city and in your wards that fall into that category.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Other points?
I would be very
Yes,
interested
go
in
ahead.
why the state declined. Now, I understand records that may have been lost or whatever, but I thought someone was investigating that.
We've asked, and I think the neighborhood has asked, and we
The
haven't
state.
got the state. We haven't got an answer yet.
And it sounds like Ms. Johnson has determined that those records were lost. Is that?
They not only moved locations, but when they entered the initial information into their database, the paperwork was not scanned in there. I've been in touch with Rob Jansen, Ms. Craywick's assistant, and he said that the only thing that he could had occurred with the division in Winston-Salem, they have a pretty good idea that all those records are lost.
All right.
And I spoke with Jeff Monkus at DOT. He's the one who I spoke with this week.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else then for discussion today, knowing that this is coming back? I believe that we can put this back on our April agenda. Is that very good? Ms. Adams?
I'll hold until April.
All right. All right, thank you very much. Then that's item G1 for today. Stay tuned to April. Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you, sir. Item G2, please.
Item G2, resolution of support with financial commitment and authorization to apply for the 2016 Transportation Invest Generating Economic Recovery Grant.
All right, and this would be Mr. Turner. This is the item was discussed yesterday.
Yes, sir. And what this would do is allow the city to apply for a grant to the federal government under the Tiger program. As I mentioned yesterday, traditional federal grants have a high percentage of federal money and a low percentage of local money. But because of the Tiger grant, it is a 50-50 match. However, it is for projects that are of significant magnitude. In this case, between $10 million and $100 million is what the Tiger grants are focused on. So we're applying for a Tiger grant of $10 million with a 50% local match. The key to this is that we would have plenty of time to come up with our local match because we're looking at using it for the pedestrian side path project that's associated with the Business 40 project, and the need to provide our participation in the project would probably be near the end of that project. So we have options for how we might fund our local match that would extend to possibly another bond referendum or other sources that would be allowed to accrue over some period of time. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
When would the match be required?
It's our understanding that the actual payment of the match would occur at the end of the construction process.
Right. And since the construction process here is anticipated to begin in 2018?
2018 with a 2-year period for the actual project, the actual closure.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Clark, you looked like you were...
I just abstained on this at the finance, and I'll abstain today, but I don't have any comments.
Although I guess the timing on building this section of it is not necessarily contingent on the timing of Business 40 shutdown. That would be best, and we're engineering it.
Absolutely, it would be best to do it at the same time.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that wasn't necessarily going to happen was we didn't have a source of funding.
Right.
But this would hit 50% of that, and based on our Washington lobbyist, she thinks this is a good match for the program and is likely to be favorably considered.
That's our understanding as well.
Okay. Mr. Taylor's had to step out. Mr. Montgomery's not here. I'll move approval.
Second.
And I'll vote yes.
And I'll abstain.
All right, so 1-0-1.
We're willing to vote if you need a vote.
Pinch hit.
It was sent forward from finance as well.
It's not finance, so basically it's going forward.
That's right.
All right, thank you very much. Item G3, please.
Item G3, presentation on city-county water system water quality.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Ron Hargrove is going to present this PowerPoint presentation to you. Just want to tee this up by reminding you that 2 months ago, I believe it was, that you asked about what was the situation with the water problems up in Flint, Michigan. And then we also have seen some information about problems in Newark, New Jersey, and some other places. And so Councilmember Adams and other council members have been pressuring us to bring information to you about what is really going on with the water systems, and specifically how are we different than these other communities. And so we've got information prepared for you. It gives you a little history of the program and also talks about our system.
Thank you. Mr. Hargrove.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and council members. Thank you for having me tonight. I've got 20 slides here. I'll be as brief as I can. Please ask questions along the way if you'd like to. Mission statement of Utilities Division: treat and distribute water and collect and treat wastewater in compliance with all the rules and maintain the lowest cost of any major system in North Carolina. We are very competitive on the rates, and we do meet our regulations. Just a reminder that utilities involves water treatment, water distribution, wastewater treatment and collection, and also solid waste disposal was under our umbrella. Our water system dates back to the 1780s. Certainly wasn't a city-county utility division then, but water was piped into the Sister's Kitchen in Old Salem in 1789, I believe. And then the sewer system dates back to the Winston Township, where a line was laid along the Tar Branch down to a community septic tank. Just a reminder that the utilities is under a city-county agency with the utility commission formed between the merger of the city-county systems in 1976, and it is an enterprise fund not supported by tax dollars. The map to the right you see there is the outline of the service district. The line in blue is the water system, which is the outer line, and then the line in green is the sewer system coverage of the county. This is a map of the water system showing our various tanks and plants and some major lines that run between those. Again, our major sources are the Yadkin River and Salem Lake, and we have a couple of intakes on the river and one on the Salem Lake.
Is that about 75-25 or 80-20?
It's about 80-20. Just an overview. Again, our source waters, Yadkin River, Salem Lake. Winston-Salem also, through a contract with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in 1959, has access to the water in Kerscott Reservoir should we ever need it. We really have not ever needed it, but we have tested it during drought conditions. It takes about 36 hours for water to be released from the reservoir and make it to our intake. So that's a good benefit that most other localities do not have. We have 3 water treatment plants, capacity of 91 million gallons per day. In 15, our demand was 36 million. We treated about 13.7 billion gallons in fiscal year 15. Our average cost of treatment was $723 per million gallons, and our O&M budget for water treatment was $9.3 million. 3 plants, just go through quickly the pictures, and the Pascal 8W Swan plant out on the northwest side of the county, 25 million gallon a day. It's a conventional treatment plant, which all of our plants are conventional treatment, and that was completed in 2004. The Nielsen plant's our largest plant at 48 million gallons a day, again, conventional treatment plant. It's in the Clemens area. It receives water directly from the river.
Mr. Turner, what do you mean by conventional treatment?
I'll explain that.
Okay, thank you.
And then the Thomas plant's our newest plant, although it's on the oldest site that we have. It's over off Martin Luther King, just south of Winston-Salem State University. The existing plant was decommissioned and demolished in 2008, and we rebuilt a new plant on top of it, that site, in 2011. It's 18 million gallons, again, conventional treatment. There is a pipeline that supplies the Thomas plant with river water, as well as it draws water directly from the lake. So it has a dual source. And that pipeline was built in the late 40s. It was the first tap of the river for our system. This is the treatment process. And when I say conventional treatment, is we don't have to do anything exotic to remove the particles and sediment in the water. The Yadkin River looks muddy. It is muddy. But once you take that clay and silt and colloidal material out of the water through conventional means, meaning pH adjustment and alum, it clears it up very nicely for us. It doesn't have a heavy organic load, so we don't have to do any extra treatment for disinfection byproducts, meaning when we add chlorine, if there's organic content in the water, You have a limit on how much byproducts are produced from the plant. We don't have to, we meet those regulations through conventional treatment and chlorine addition, where everywhere east of Winston-Salem has to add ammonia to their system and have to take extra steps throughout the year to keep their system in control.
Could you walk through what each one of these little steps are real quick?
Sure. This is basically showing you the intake of source water through a pump station, which we have on the river sites that we have. We have 2 of those. It then is pumped to the plant where we feed some pre-addition chemicals. It's a pH control here. It's lime. We feed caustic soda. And we feed alum, which is aluminum sulfate. That's a coagulant, just kind of like your blood coagulates. Alum coagulates the clay particles in the water. We mix that up, and you go through a process of coagulation and flocculation. We're basically trying to make the particles sticky, and then they stick together as the more you mix them, and then it goes into sedimentation. The particles, as they stick together, they start to settle because they become heavy. And then you get a clear layer that's produced that goes on top of your filters, which are shown here. And the filtration process is kind of like the percolation process of the Earth's surface, where water filters down through the soil, the clay, the silt, the rock layer, and you have an aquifer under there. That's how the filtration process works here. We then add chlorine to the water so that we can disinfect the water, and we keep it housed in some storage on site for a period of time to make sure that chlorine has contact time with the water to make sure there's no bacteria in the water, and then it's pumped out into the system. The other thing that's important and related to the news lately is we feed zinc orthophosphate as a corrosion control inhibitor. This part and these part and the intake, the source water, are the things that differentiate our system from the situation in Flint. They change sources for financial reasons and maybe some pressure from where they were drawing their source water, and they weren't required by the regulatory body, either the state or the EPA, to my understanding, to perform a corrosion control study. And unfortunately, the water that they treated was leaching lead and other components out of the plumbing and piping system in the city. And unfortunately for the customers, they are experiencing some severe problems based upon that.
Just one moment. Mr. Clark?
Yeah. It's my understanding older homes, and this town certainly has older homes, as a lot of towns do, maybe not California or somewhere here. And so we know that our water is going to come in contact with lead pipes or lead solder. And therefore, we know we got to put the zinc orthophosphate in appropriately.
Correct.
Isn't that a no-brainer? Shouldn't a town know, and I'll pick on Flint, I guess, they certainly have older houses. They certainly know that there's lead solder, lead pipes out there. Why would this not be a no-brainer to check the, and I'm assuming that's a pH type control or whatever you're doing?
It's a chemical addition as well as pH, because it only works in a certain pH range.
Okay.
And
so they know they got lead pipes and lead solder down line. It seems like to me it's a no-brainer that they know they've got to adjust their water accordingly. Your thoughts? From
the treatment employees in the town, I think it is a no-brainer. From what I understand, in Michigan, when cities are in financial trouble, they can appoint emergency managers who have more authority than even the elected body. And so it sounds to me like there was a financial decision made about we can pay less to get the water, and the voice of the treatment operators weren't heard.
Is it a federal or state regulation that you have to sample that water and put the zinc orthophosphate in accordingly? Is that an EPA or a state?
That's an EPA. A corrosion control study is required by the lead and copper rule from 1991. Okay. So it's a federal requirement.
Federal requirement. Okay, thank you.
And the, do you happen to know whether Flint did add the corrosion control element, or?
I think after a period of many months, they have finally started adding chemical for corrosion control.
So it wasn't a matter of...
And they also switched back to their original source.
Sure. But in the case of Flint, it wasn't a matter of they just weren't calculating how much to add, right? They weren't adding any at all.
They didn't add any at all.
And as I understand it, the base problem was they had a more corrosive water supply coming in.
Correct.
Was that just the pH, or was there something else?
Yeah, I've read various articles, but it sounds to me like the source water closest to them had a lot of industrial discharges that had a lot of chlorides in the water. You can think about salt water and the corrosivity of salt water. It wasn't to that degree, but it was about 12 times more corrosive than the Lake Huron water they were receiving.
Okay, thank you. Please go.
Sure. Getting into the lead and copper rule, again, promulgated in 1991. The Utilities Division installed and maintained corrosion control since 1992. We did the study work and understood what water quality parameters were important to monitor. We did sampling in 1993 in targeted houses according to the rule. The EPA rules set up some Tier 1, 2, and 3 target homes. These are homes that were built after 1982 that had lead service lines or lead soldered piping. The idea was that newer homes, the lead and solder was more free to be leached from the water system if it was corrosive, and so they targeted homes that had recently been built at the time. The lead, I'll get to that later, but our initial sampling in 93, our 90 percentile, which is where you're measured at if you meet the rule or not, was less than 10 parts per billion. The action level is 15 parts per billion. If you exceed that action level, you have to take extra steps on corrosion control, prevention, and that kind of thing. There's also a copper component. We were well below that action level of 1.3 parts per million or 1,300 parts per billion. We've gone through a series of years of sampling. We went from twice a year down to once a year down to once every 3 years. So our last sampling event was 2013. All samples were below detection level, meaning they were less than 3 parts per billion in our system, the 90th percentile level.
So all the samples were below?
The 90th percentile. I'm not saying, maybe I said all, but I think all the 90%, out of 100 samples, 90 of them were less than detection limits, less than 3 parts per billion.
Were there any samples that hit the action level?
There were not any above 15, no, sir.
Can you give us, by comparison, what kinds of values were they measuring in the Flint water report with switch values?
I've heard values that are outrageous, like 15,000 parts per billion.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Our next sampling event's this summer. The rule requires you to do it during the highest temperature. That way the water's obviously, the kinetics are more active, so it's more aggressive during those periods of time. And then there's some cost. We spend about $366,000 a year adjusting pH and adding our corrosion control inhibitor.
When you sample, do you sample in the house or at the street? Where you
It's in the house. This rule is the only rule the EPA has promulgated that regulates us at the customer's tap. Everything else,
we don't own the pipe.
we don't own the plumbing, but we're regulated by what's in the customer's tap.
And in theory, even if they may have lead pipes or lead solder, because we're putting in the zinc alpha phosphate, then it should take care of it. It's not like it did. I mean, I'm amazed at the 90th percentile. You were still getting no detection.
Correct. Yeah, it passivates the system. That's why, we employed that treatment during 1992, and then we sampled in 1993 to let it passivate the system, basically coat the lines in the plumbing systems.
So you're testing at the end user site?
End
right?
users.
How do you choose the end user?
Again, it was based on the tier, based upon when the house was built, and were they served by a lead service line, or did they have lead solder in the copper piping?
So I guess the question is, do you target residences that are more likely to have it?
All of our samples are from Tier 1 sites.
Okay.
In Tier 1, you mean the ones that are most likely to be vulnerable?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And how many do you sample?
We have 150 sites.
And what's the geographic distribution?
It's all over the system, city and county. Little bit of more information, things to think about. Lead exposure. If you'll recall, leaded gasoline was banned in the 1970s. You know, there was a study done that showed that children that lived near highways had higher exposures to lead in their blood. Lead paint was banned in 1978. The lead solder ban was issued along with the new promulgation of the Safe Drinking Water Act in 1986. Lead in fixtures was banned in 2014. It includes all the appurtenances that we employ in the water system. Our meter and our brass fittings contract, that cost increased about 40% with the no lead ban in 2014. I did check with the Forsyth County Health Department. They have a program monitoring lead in blood levels of children, have had it for years. The trends they sent me over the last 10 years have been on a downward slope, and folks that are children that they would consider to be poisoned by lead, there's like maybe one detect a year now, and obviously it's not from the water system. Just jumping ahead, the system is made up of tanks and pump stations. Tanks, if you'll just envision why they're there, they serve three purposes: fire protection, system pressure, and storage. All the elevated tanks, the water sitting up there applies pressure to the system, and then if there's a ground storage tank, we have a pump station associated with that. Utilities, construction, and maintenance, the other side of the water system. They're the folks that make the repairs to the pipes and make sure that flushing is completed and that kind of thing. They maintain about 2,245 miles of pipe, valves, hydrants, connections. They extend mains, they install connections, they flush hydrants, they provide emergency response. If you recall, February 15, last year was not very kind to us. Uh-oh. Let me back up. I had some cool videos here. There it goes. Will it work? No. Oh, well. Just showing you how the water, I mean, it was a significant amount of water. We shut down 52 on a Saturday and I-40 on a Sunday. So those guys, about 30 responders, worked really hard over that weekend to get us back in shape and get the roads back open.
If something like that happens, can you reroute so that folks still have water?
Yes, sir. We have a lot of redundancy on the Cassell Street. It took us a few days to get some valves, valving appropriately, especially for the ABC board offices over there. But, yeah, we got them back in water very quickly.
Let's be sure ABC doesn't vote. Yeah, I'd hate for them not to have it anymore.
The meter shop, they are the guys out reading meters and maintaining the residential and commercial meters in our system. And those size ranges are from 5/8 to 10-inch meters. And there's a pictorial of kind of how that piping and network flows between the main and the residents. And then we have a technical services group. They get involved in backflow prevention that protects the public system from any backflows from the private side, as well as they have the flushing our system to maintain water age and that kind of thing. They do tank isolation. We just isolated the Wake Forest tank last week. They also do chlorination projects. If a contractor's installing a new main somewhere, they can actually hire the city to come and chlorinate the line. That way we can make sure it's done properly. We always test those lines to make sure they pass disinfection. And then we work off of our mobile work order system through our handheld devices, so we can tell what assets are in the ground and what valves to operate when we're out in the system. So that's it as far as a quick nutshell version of the water system. Be glad to answer any other questions.
I have one question and one comment. First off, I'd appreciate a copy of this.
Certainly.
Second comment, I want to thank you folks for doing your job right, quietly, and with no fanfare.
Yeah.
Two questions. One, you mentioned that folks east of us have to do something else. I'd be curious your comments there. And number two, and I think I know the answer to this, but our capacity is 91 million gallons a day, but we average 39. But it's my understanding we need that capacity because there's certain times of the day when people use it at that rate. So
right.
To comment on those.
Sure. The folks east of us, including Greensboro and Raleigh and everywhere else east, they actually add ammonia to the water along with the chlorine, so they form something called chloramines. and that compound lasts longer in the water, and it doesn't form the byproducts when their water has more organics in it, naturally occurring organics.
Don't form this at home. Chlorine and ammonia do not form at home.
Yeah.
So
They have to add the ammonia because they have more organics.
they have more organics in the water, and so we're measured. The longer the water's in the system, the more byproducts you produce, and we're now regulated at individual sites around our system. It used to be an average of all the sites, but we have 12 sites that we have to monitor quarterly, and you're monitored on a running average, and any one that spikes above a certain limit, you have to do public notice and that kind of thing. So a lot of those systems that have the organics
If
add
we're
the chlorine.
recruiting a business that may be going to Raleigh, we can say, what difference is our water does not have ammonia?
That's correct. It's not extra treatment for somebody that's going to use the water. People with fish tanks and that kind of thing, they really appreciate, and dialysis units really appreciate us not using ammonia.
And then the capacity issue?
The capacity issue, yes, we have 3 plants, so we got kind of triple redundancy, and then there is a peak factor. Really, it hits us in the summertime. Our historical peak has been about 69 million. But there's a peak factor of about 150% of average day that we see on average over our system.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
As I recall from when I was on the coast, the problem with heavy organics and relying on chlorination exclusively, you produced trichlorides?
Trihalomethanes.
Trihalomethanes, and they have carcinogenic.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah. And is it that adding the ammonia allows you to keep the chlorination down, or is it that the organics react to the ammonia before the?
The chlorine is kind of complexed with the ammonia, and so they don't quite form the compounds that free chlorine does with the naturally occurring organics. You actually feed a higher dose of chlorine than you do with free chlorine.
Interesting. Okay. I'm sorry. Techies. Yes, ma'am.
To Councilmember Clark's comments, I want to again thank you and staff for doing what you do every day for the most important item in our life that we take for granted. We don't know all of the transparency and things that go on behind the scenes, that when we turn that faucet or whatever, that the water is safe and we can drink it, and we can be assured of that. As Mr. Turner, and and Mr. Garrity, and Mr. Best, Councilmember Bessie, when you retired, like Ms. Burke said, you see a lot of television on the spot when things happen. And the first thing I thought about at home watching the network news, MSNBC, when the Flint issue jumped, immediately I said there are going to be other issues with other smaller towns who haven't had the resources that cities like we do to be able to be progressive and ahead of it, proactive. So I thought with the conversation, even today, I went to Cook Elementary to volunteer this morning and talked to several classes to tell them what we do with the city. And when I asked them about, do you know about your drinking water, the first thing most of them said, is it like Flint's? I said, no, it's not like Flint. They said, is it safe? I said, yeah, it's safe. It's the city of Winston-Salem. But again, I want to thank you, and not just for this group, but on behalf of the citizens of Winston-Salem. Mr. Garrett, Mr. Turner, and you guys, is there any way we can get this on 13 to run to help re-educate our citizens on not just this, but on the basis? I've seen some clips on the utilities on 13, and I thought it was very interesting. But I think if we could add just a couple of things from this presentation, you'd be surprised how many citizens will look at this over and over again. So, again, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate this comment.
Yeah, and if we could post that on the web, maybe we could clip this segment or do another segment, clip that on and put it on the website. That way people can come and go to it at their own leisure. I just had one quick question on the Carscott agreement. Correct. Is that something that we pay for on an ongoing basis?
We have a principal and interest payment. It's a 50-year amortization, so it's a small amount we're paying. That ends in 2022. We also pay The Corps contracts, the Corps pays 65%, the local sponsors pay 35%. So we and Wilkes County, who also is a sponsor of the project, split that 35. So we pay 35% of the O&M costs. So overall, it's roughly about $200,000 a year.
So we'll have to renegotiate that in 2022?
We're working on that right now.
And we're hopefully building up a reserve to financially so that we can, I'm sure it won't be as cheap as it was last time.
Well, my goal is to work with other interest in the Yadkin River, and because the Corps' mission, there's 3 prongs. None of those are water supply. And so we're trying to make sure the Corps is interested in water supply and is reacting to requests for water supply, because you're not going to build another reservoir anywhere due to environmental prohibition. And so Kerr Scott seems to be a beautiful place to add 1, 2, 3 feet of extra storage, and that's just that many more days of supply during a drought condition.
Follow up on that. So you're saying that whatever yours was 20 something?
2.
Does that mean we lose our rights to the 30 feet at that point? Or
No, I don't believe so. We're just dealing with the folks we were dealing with. The Corps have retired, and they had a different interpretation. So the folks we're dealing with now, there's more process to it, but there are some respects that suggest that it's an automatic renewal of 25 additional years, but we want some extra things in the contract.
And it's my understanding we are, at least have been, looking at adding a few feet.
That's the goal, is to figure out what the process is, to do the study. It's going to take really federal action by our delegation to get funding in for what's called a 216 study to do that evaluation to see if it's even viable to add storage.
Are you talking about raising the dam level?
The dam level is already, there's 55 feet above the water pool as far as a dam. So adding 2 or 3 feet is what my goal would be, and how do you do the evaluation to get us there? There is no really construction to allow it to happen other than maybe moving some recreational facilities.
I got a friend that's got a fixed dock. He would want it moved.
Correct.
All right, anything else? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's a good presentation, good information.
Thank you.
Housekeeping matter, Mr. Taylor asked that he be recorded as a yes on G2, so it would be 2-0. Thank you. G4, please.
Item G4, presentation on proposed improvements to the passageway between Cherry Street and Trade Street by the Downtown Winston-Salem Partnership.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you will introduce yourself and address for the record.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The hat I wear today is Chair of the Bid Committee, and I'm here as a requirement of council. One of the requirements they had that is if we start a capital project, the council be made aware of it, and so that's what I'm here to do today.
And you are.
I'm Ralph Womble. At least I was when I walked in. So the passageway. This is a hangover from the 70s Trade Street Mall creation that was done, and it is the walkway that travels between Trade Street and Cherry. And it goes in between the Marriott. It's an old hangover, so this is a visual beauty thing that we're going to be in the enhancement that we're looking to do. But it is a walkway, and it's used by visitors and citizens alike. And it is also good transportation because you can cut through and get to Cherry very easily. But unfortunately, the leftovers are pretty bare. The design is as poor as it could be. There are blind corners when you're walking around through there, and because it's really not visible and watched, lots of things happen in there. And since I live and walk all over this town, I've seen everything in there. And so part of this is also to clear it up. So we take out the blind corners, which we're going to go through all this. But the whole purpose is to make it a visual, nicer walkway. So that when you go through there, we've got something nice instead of something scary. The police department is very supportive of us cleaning this up because it's a problem area. And so we've got Kristen Haff with Roots First, which is a landscape urban design firm that she heads up or works with. And through private funds, we've hired her to give us a good visualization of what we're trying to do. And then I'll answer any questions afterwards, or she will.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody.
Name and address, please.
Sure. Kristen Hoff, and address? You said 641 Summit Street,
Thank you.
27101. Okay. So as Ralph said, I'm Kristen. I'm with Roots First. We're also working with Joel Osgood Landscape Architecture as the landscape architect on this project. And just to make sure everybody knows where we're talking about, this is that little space between Trade Street and Cherry Street, just half a block north of Marshall Plaza and 4th Street. So this was initially created, from what we understand, as a relic from the Trade Street Mall. So you can see some of that, the brick, some of that, design vocabulary from that. And I don't have a picture of it here, but kind of below you on that picture on the left, you're standing on Cherry Street in that picture of the left. There's a gate that goes into Embassy Suites. And from what I understand, this was actually created to create access into there. We need to maintain that access. And so that's why the space remains as it is. Of course, it's a place that people aren't exactly sure how to use. We call it the passageway. People on break use it from the Marriott to smoke cigarettes in. Plenty of people actually walk through it. And otherwise people kind of loiter in there. There is some drugs that get sold in there and things like that. We've seen urination on the planters. That's the kind of place we're talking about. Vegetation management has some issues with what the vegetation that's in there now has been pretty hard to maintain, so we've been talking a lot with them about what would make it easier. And so again, just generally maintenance concerns and safety issues. So we're really looking at this as a placemaking project. This isn't a major capital improvement project. This is how can we do some simple fixes that would make it feel like less of a leftover space and more of a place that could matter to people. So when we think about that, it's cleaning it up, it's perhaps bringing some artful qualities to it, making it feel safer, making it feel more comfortable for people to be in, and a little bit more active and more eyes in the place. Totally not going to bore you with these pages, but just let you know that we did plenty of analysis here. We were looking at both the physical space itself and also how people used it. We did a lot of time just sitting in the space. And amazingly, we have about an average of 11 people coming through every 20 minutes, and now this is more during peak times, but most of those are neutral or positive, so just people walking through or just people hanging out not doing kind of negative things. So that's interesting. Most people see the more negative aspects that happen in the space and focus on that, but there's a lot more positive or neutral uses happening. So the other things I would mention from this is just that there is let's see if there's a good one. Can you see my cursor? There's a wall right here. It's a concrete wall that creates a significant visual barrier for people that are walking both from the Cherry Street side, but particularly from the Trade Street side. It's easy for people to hide right behind here. Not even explicitly hiding, but to just be there. And it feels uncomfortable for people to want to walk through because they can't see ahead of them. Also down here, you can see in this image, there's some significant vegetation, just overgrown shrubs. There's often somebody that sleeps in there, and it also creates a visual barrier from people even walking along Trade Street to be able to even see into the space in the first place. So it just makes it feel kind of seedy and a little bit less comfortable. We looked at a whole lot of places like this where you're trying to make some small improvements to make a big effect, and we're really focusing here on cost effectiveness and kind of bang for your buck. And we came to 3 conclusions in terms of what we can do with the design that are simple and cost effective. And we're calling them illuminate, cultivate, activate. So illuminate is let's get some better lighting in the space. If you look at the previous one, I didn't point this one specifically out, but you can see how much darkness there is. This is at night, and how much light effect you actually get in the space. So number 1 is illuminate. Let's add some more lighting to the space. Cultivate is number 2, and that means fixing up broken pavers and kind of streamlining and making more maintenance-free the paving situation, and also adding vegetation that is going to be easier to maintain and looks nicer, makes it more tranquil and restorative for people who are walking through downtown. And finally, activate. Activate, we're thinking of this fairly simply. This isn't going to be some sort of major activity center, and we're not going to pretend that it is. But even simple signage can do a lot for making people feel like, maybe this place has hours you're supposed to be in it. Indicating to people that if you walk through here, you actually get over to Cherry Street, that this can be a pass through, that kind of thing. So this is just a really quick concept sketch of what we're thinking. This gives a really an overview of the feeling of the space. When you first look at it, you could think, wow, that's a lot of new vegetation. Isn't that a lot to maintain? And I'll say a few things about that. First of all, what you see on the ground plane are pretty simple grasses. And those first and foremost can stay alive and do pretty well all through the year. They're also really easy for vegetation management to maintain because they can come through and mow them back at certain times of the year, just kind of all in one fell swoop. Also, we're thinking of adding trees for more structure as opposed to shrubs that can block your view that are lower. Trees that have a more structural quality to them, but their canopies are easier to see through. So while you're getting structure out of the trees being placed like this, they're not kind of blocking your view so much. Also, what we're looking at and what we've analyzed is we think that the paving that needs to be fixed, we can actually deal with the ground plane in a more cost-effective manner by replacing some of the broken paving with actual vegetation areas, because it'll be less expensive to put in and less expensive to maintain. But then those planted areas can actually serve a really important function to deal with some significant stormwater drainage issues that are happening in this space. So we're not looking at this as technically a stormwater planter, which is a more high-tech kind of thing, but still an area that can handle particular areas of drainage concerns. That's something that's causing some of this paving to fail. In terms of the paving itself, we think we may go as simple as keeping the existing brick and teaming up with an artist to actually paint the brick and just replace the brick where it needs to. Again, thinking about simple ways that we can do this. Alternatively, we might look at some paving replacement or doing some spot changes in particular places where paving is failing. But again, using paving or plantings as a way to kind of minimize the amount of paving that needs to be dealt with. A few other things I'd mention is we are calling for the installation of bike racks because of one, it's just a good thing to do, but second of all, because of its close proximity to the transit center, it sends a message both metaphorically in terms of us being a transit, a bike-friendly city, but also physically provides that infrastructure, which is important. I'll get to that. The signage we think should be we just want to install simple signage on the Trade Street and the Cherry Street sides that indicates closing hours for the space, and that's part of why we're starting to toy with the idea of calling it a park, passageway park, because it starts to indicate more of a sense of caring and stewardship for the place, but then also has closing hours. Right. So, and then perhaps other kind of directional signage that can happen there. As far as the wall, you can see it here. This is going to happen. We're going to get into specifics on this as part of design development, but we will likely lower the wall so that you have more visibility, but they still have a structural barrier there for various reasons that we've heard from neighbors that could be important. Alternatively, we may replace it with more of a fence or trellis type structure that could be planted. So we're looking at those alternatives and seeing what makes the most sense. Most important is to have that visual permeability through here. There's opportunities for partnering with the Arts Council and creating some gallery space through here or art space. There's the potential to do some sort of lighting projections, but all of these are things that can come kind of as add-ons to the basic infrastructure of the space. And then this is the site plan. It's pretty small to look at that in too much detail. If anybody's interested, we do have paper copies that you can look at. And the other thing I'd mention that you can see in this image that you couldn't see as much in the other, so in addition to, so I've already mentioned that we're taking out that major shrubs that block visibility this way. I mentioned about the wall that blocks visibility through here. we toyed with a lot of ideas of making this central part as more of like a real place for people to be in, and thought about how we could do that. The reality is there's no eyes on that space. There's no buildings that look out onto it, and we're just not comfortable making that into too much of a space. So we want to tighten it and make it feel like it's more of a walkway through. And, are even looking at lighting opportunities. We definitely want to have the most lighting in that center space. So you get in there and it is all lit up. You're not doing anything sketchy. That's almost the most important thing. All lit up. And also there are really simple things that could be done with light sensing, where as people walk through, the color of the light changes a little bit, or the brightness changes, so that people get a sense that it's interacting with them as they move through, so they have a little bit more of accountability when they walk through. Again, illuminate, cultivate, activate, trying to do some really simple things to get some impact here in the space. This just shows our process. We're wrapping up the first stage, which has been the conceptual design process. We'll be quickly moving through design development and then into construction documentation, which are steps 2 and 3. We hope to be ready to have this out for bid in the fall, aiming for a winter construction. That was based on preference from the convention center in terms of when they need access to the Embassy Suites space. So that is certainly going to be our aim from our side. Questions?
Just one feedback point on the walkway. You show what looks like there on the bottom, the foreground, what looks almost like a planned meander. Mm-hmm. I would recommend against that. Mm-hmm. That's such a short cycle that I think walkers tend to get frustrated. I know I do.
Oh, sure. No, absolutely. Just to be very clear, it's actually, so we couldn't even if we wanted to, we wouldn't really get away with a meander because we need to be able to bring vehicles through. So what you're actually seeing is we were attempting to understand if we could have kind of bays here where things could happen. This gets into the Marriott side. Potentially that's a place where food carts could set up. But we were just trying to, so in fact, these are actually spaces, or maybe that's a spot where there's some sort of public art piece. So that's actually what you're seeing more than an actual meander in there. And thanks for the point. I should have been more clear about that.
So
when you're walking,
somebody simply walking through can walk in a straight line.
It's going to feel more like an alley of trees and that you're walking through. And so this pavement differentiation is a little bit more just like visual interest, and also to create opportunities for something to happen there. We're not at that stage of the design, but.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Other questions, comments? Yes, ma'am.
I remember when it was built.
Yeah.
When the concept at the time and the idea, again, at that time we were struggling just to try to save downtown. So let's put a park and put some cobblestone and pavers and some little, and it still didn't work.
Yeah.
But I like this idea. I like anything that creates an atmosphere with lights and trees and greenery and sustainability. I'm into that. I love it when I go to other cities, whether it's Greenville, South Carolina, New Bern, doesn't matter, Asheville. It draws people in. The fact that you're trying to pull people. Now you got to remember, when the people stay at the hotel, they don't really like coming on this back side. Mm-hmm. So they come out the front, or they're on Marshall or either 5th Street, and they'll walk all the way down the block to get over to 4th or wherever they're going. I think it's because, again, people don't feel safe. Mm-hmm. And I think this will help tremendously with downtown visitors staying in our hotels and that visit us. They'll like this. They're used to this. They'll like this.
Thank you.
So good job.
And I forgot to mention that actually up on the Marriott side, every meeting I keep bringing up the idea of how about you guys create a cafe space up here so you're actually overlooking it. And it's kind of tricky because their kitchen and restaurant is on the other side, but he seems to be listening.
They're talking about putting that where people will be looking down.
And so people could be looking down, and if we had something...
That's big city, I like that.
Yeah, and if we had some sort of exhibit in here that would make it interesting to look at, it could really do a lot for making it... We just want people to be looking in the space. We want eyes on it so it feels like it's a safe place to be.
And to that point, there's really not a window that looks out onto that entire space.
Not a window.
On either side. You got the Oddfellows, and it's just all
on that side of the Marriott.
Blank wall. So you're dealing with some really sheer, ugly, space. I think it's a great idea. It's we don't have that much wasted space left downtown. This is definitely a wasted space. This is an opportunity to do something nice that's really not very nice right now. And this used to go into beneath the elms, right? Is this where you brought the Zamboni in to surface the ice?
Yep.
So
I love that.
That's just about a generation ago. It's long, long gone. So I'm all for it. I think it's going to be great.
Great. Other questions, comments? Thank you very much. Very interesting.
Thanks.
Any other items from committee members? Mr. Turner? Anything else?
No.
Thank you very much. In that case, we are adjourned.
Good job.